Well, contemporary humanistic Judaism, beliefs, values, and practices is a reality. And it's been out now for longer than we expected because it started showing up before Thanksgiving when it was supposed to be released in January. So we've been doing this kind of promotional and integrationist work with the book for quite a while. And so it's a great pleasure to welcome everyone to this discussion program. Again, I'm Rabbi Adam Shalom from Kol Hadash Humanistic Congregation outside of Chicago and Dean for North America of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. And with me is my co-editor, Rabbi Jody Kornfeld of Beth Chaverim Humanistic Jewish Community, also outside of Chicago. We're happy to have you here for our discussion, and I'm going to turn it over to Jody after I ask one question, and that is, I'm curious how many people on this discussion Zoom have actually read the book. If you go to the reaction button, you can see that you can put a thumbs up, or you could put a heart if you really like the book. So if you could just give us an idea of if you had a chance to read the book, that'd be great. And then the other thing that would be useful is if you want to type into chat where you're connecting from. It's always nice to get a sense of geographically where people are coming from into the program. I see someone's going to be ordering the book next week. That's great. Thank you very much. I might move up that purchase by a few days if you're ordering it directly from the publisher, because there's currently a 40% discount code that we believe ends at the end of February. So if you want to save that 40% and not give money to Amazon, you can you can order directly from the publisher, jps.org, and they have a discount code for at least the next few days. All right. So with that, let me turn it over to Jody. It seems like not a lot of people have read the book. So Jody, please.
Okay. I too welcome all of you. As Adam said, we both live and work outside of Chicago, and despite being in adjacent zip codes, we did the entire book on Zoom, uh, which was quite a process. Some of the sessions and the editing and the writing, and especially the indexing, required plugging in my laptop multiple times for a single meeting. But I want to give everybody a little bit of an overview of the book before we sort of open it up for discussion and particular questions. This book is part of the JPS Anthologies of Jewish Thought series. And JPS, as I understand, originally had invited a proposal about humanistic Judaism. And I was very, very fortunate that Adam asked me to join the project and to be one of the editors in 2021. So not only have we been doing this longer than we first thought as far as it got published and we received it before Thanksgiving, but the entire process had been going on for quite some time. We were directed to focus solely on contemporary humanistic Judaism. So this anthology is not really an historic view of major thinkers and fellow travelers and so on. Instead, it really is about our movement as it exists, obviously with thinkers like Rabbi Wein, Rabbi Friedman, so on. They're included, but it wasn't meant to be secular Judaism. It's humanistic Judaism. And that focus, it allowed us, as we state in the preface, to fairly and comprehensively present the contemporary humanistic Jewish experience and core issues addressed by the movement. It defines the movement and helps answer many challenging questions humanistic Jews face from other Jews. Among them, how can you or your movement be Jewish and celebrate Judaism if you don't believe in God? It's our intention that the audience for this book would include humanistic Jews who want a deeper and more thorough understanding of the form of Judaism that gives their lives, our lives, meaning, as well as Jews of other denominations who seem to have never heard of us, or if they have, they just don't get us. And we also hope that students of comparative Judaism or comparative religion will find the volume useful. Despite the full title having 3 specified subjects, beliefs, values, practices, the book is divided into 4 parts: beliefs and ethics, identity, culture, and Jewish life. After a general introduction, each part is supported by between 2 and 5 chapters, and each chapter contains several essays related to the topic. We also created a study guide for the book, and that we'll likely be using as once this overview is done. And that's available at no charge at jps.org. So if your own communities want it, if you want to have a book group, whatever it is, there's a discussion guide that we created. Beliefs and ethics are part 1. There, the fundamental and foundational elements are considered. And this includes the God question, ethics, positive humanism, and spirituality. Part 2 addresses identity. In its introduction, we write, Humanistic Judaism brings a new paradigm to the question, who is a Jew? It finds the old dogmatic and hierarchical approach to Jewish identity unacceptable. With no Sinai covenant or heavenly commander, the meaning of becoming Jewish, or being Jewish for that matter, is to be found through identification with the historical experience and culture of the Jewish people. Now, that notion, it's supported by the most recent Pew Research Center study of American Jews in 2020, and a portion of that study is included in the appendix to the book. That study found that a majority of American Jews view Jewish identity as cultural. 53% of the participants responded that being Jewish is mainly a matter of ancestry, culture, or culture and ancestry, not religion alone, or even in combination with those other choices. This part of identity also includes issues of welcoming and inclusion, adoption of humanistic Judaism in contradistinction to the conversion process found in other denominations, intermarriage, and Israel Zionism. At its core, adjacent to the positive humanism that makes up the first half of the movement's name, humanistic Judaism, as you all know, centers Jewish culture as the basis for Jewish identity. And that leads to part 3, culture. Religion is, of course, part of Jewish culture, but it's not the only part, nor is it the dominant part. That would be too narrow. And I want to share with you what the late Yehuda Bauer wrote, and we include in the book. And honestly, this is one of my favorite passages of the whole book. And what he says is, Bible is Judaism, Talmud is Judaism, everyday life is Judaism, Jewish history is Judaism, Jewish poetry is Judaism, Jewish customs are Judaism, Jewish food is Judaism, Jewish jokes are Judaism, just as religion is Judaism. But you cannot argue that Judaism equals the religious beliefs of Jews. First, because these beliefs were and are different, even mutually contradictory. And second, because religion was and is just one aspect of Jewish existence. Today, for many Jews, it is not even that. Judaism, then, is everything that the Jewish people in their very long history have produced. Judaism is Jewish civilization. Judaism is Jewish culture. So to enumerate the various elements of Jewish culture is one thing, but to give actual living examples of it is more resonant with both the reader and the student of humanistic Judaism. Jewish culture is full, rich, and diverse. It includes all manner of cultural material produced by Jews wherever they lived, in whatever language they spoke, and in whatever medium they used. We paid special attention to point out that Jewish culture was not or should not be monopolized by Ashkenazi male Jews. Alluding to Amos O's essay, A Full Cart or an Empty One, Thoughts on Jewish Culture, the secular cart or canon has never been empty, and its fullness, breadth, and width continues to grow. There is no authority that deems it closed and immutable as of a certain point in time. From this perspective, it's an expansion of the notion of a canon, generally thought of as a closed body of works. And it's incumbent on us, on all of us, to add to the canon, but also to retain cultural literacy about our own texts. And those texts include the Bible and one of the most compelling characters that humans ever created, and that's the human created literary character of God. Moving on to contemporary texts, we included excerpts from 3 Jewish writers that use Jewish literature, but as fiction and memoir and an essay or short story, I should say, to create what we called a mirror to see one's own experiences. And out of so many options, and truly, as you all know, with Jewish authors, there are so many options. We chose Nathan Englander, Edgar Carrot, and Nicole Krauss. Non-textual material, likewise, is part of the Jewish culture. There's an essay that I wrote that addresses the existence of Jewish art throughout the Jewish historical experience, and an essay by Cantor Jonathan Friedman that explores music by, for, and as humanistic Jews. Part 4 focused on how Judaism is lived, with examples of ketubot, liturgy, a bar mitzvah speech, and essays on sitting Shiva and on education. Because you see, without such examples, contemporary humanistic Judaism would appear unrealized and might appear to only be an intellectual exercise. And then we concluded the book with a section that we call Go Forth and Learn. And in this section, we put additional materials. Obviously, we couldn't include everything. We included additional materials, whether they be textual or they be pieces of music, they be film, television series, etc. And it's a starting point. It's not necessarily incomplete, because for more material would continue to be related to each chapter. Indeed, as soon as we had submitted the manuscript, we realized that the list was already in need of updating, because new books were being published, new movies came out, new music produced. So like the rest of the book, which we view as an invitation to the reader, Go Forth and Learn is the reader's opportunity to expand what's set out there. I just want to say, Adam and I are very, very proud of this book. And it's our hope that it's an important contribution to our movement and to everyone's personal experience of humanistic Judaism.
Thank you, Jody. Now, for those who still want to read the book after that wonderful overview, there's a lot to find. And there were some things that actually surprised us in looking over the book. And we read it probably 4 or 5 times in its entirety and in part of the proofing process. 8 times for Jody. Okay, she beats me. One of the themes that sort of emerges holistically from the whole book is the balancing of individual and community, where in a humanistic Jewish community, you have free thinkers, people who make up their own minds. And then we try to get them to say the same thing at the same time, or to find common cause, or to agree on a particular stance of action or a response to an issue, or even liturgically, moments of silence or responsive readings. Do you adapt a Kaddish, or do you not adapt the Kaddish because the Kaddish resonance is sort of canonically traditional? So that balancing of individual self-actualization, making your own choices, but also feeling part of a larger group. You know, we make our own ethical choices, but we draw from an ethical tradition that includes both general philosophy and Judaism. That was one of the themes that really struck us. We were also impressed by the wide range of thought that our movement has presented, and we tried to represent some of that. One of the pieces that I'm actually very happy we included in the book to highlight is a Facebook discussion on a particular issue. Some years ago, we had a discussion in the Humanistic Judaism Facebook discussion group about whether or not it's appropriate for a humanistic Jew to wear a kippah or a yarmulke as a head covering. And there's a book called The Guide to Humanistic Judaism, which all members of the Society for Humanistic Judaism receive. That was recently updated in 2017, I believe. And in that discussion group, one of the newer members of the society had a reaction to the essay about kippot, about wearing a yarmulke, because the guide had said it's inappropriate for humanistic Jews to wear it. Now, part of that is the sort of founding ideology approach. Part of that is generational, because the guide was originally written in the 1990s, and this is now, almost 30 years later. Part of it was Sherwin Wine's style. Those who read a lot of his work, and I've been very immersed in what I call Sherwinalia over the years. There's actually a tribute website for Sherwin called sherwinwine.com, where you can read hundreds of essays and other materials, get access to audio recordings and so on. But Sherwin had a very kind of authoritarian rabbi style of there's this way to do it and that way to do it. My favorite example, just because it's funny, is in the Humanist Haggadah, which he wrote in 1979 or 78, something like that. When it describes the egg that's on the Seder plate, there's a parenthetical instruction that said each person present should take the egg and salt it to improve its flavor. And I always think to myself, what if I don't want to salt? What if I don't like salt? Why does this book why is it telling me how to season my food? But that was a bit of Sherwin's style, was a directive. And what I found interesting about this book and about that particular passage of the discussion from Facebook was that even the rabbis in our movement now have a very different style. Even if we may choose not to wear a yarmulke, as I don't wear one. My approach is everyone's in charge of their own head. Even at a wedding, if they ask me to wear one, I'll say no, thank you, and that's generally the end of it, because it's my head. What are they going to do? And I've had weddings where everybody wears one. I've had weddings where nobody wears one. It's up to them. But part of the dialogue was the people who were humanistic Jews and yet felt meaning in having that kippah on their head at certain times, not every day, not all the time, but at special events. They were able to articulate why it was meaningful to them and why it did not feel inconsistent with their understanding of humanistic Judaism. So I think that our more egalitarian approach, where rabbis have more knowledge, experience, but not an authoritarian ability to impose one standard, showing that evolution in our thought, I thought was very important as well. And the last thing I'll mention is the very end of the book, we included a statement that was issued by an organization that actually doesn't exist anymore, called the International Federation of Secular Humanistic Jews. But it was issued in the year 2000. It was Choosing to Live as a Secular Humanistic Jew. And it tries to encapsulate not only our values, but also our approach to Jewish life, how we celebrate, how we choose from Jewish tradition, because we are the heirs that get to choose. And we felt like that was a very nice summation of who we are. So if you need a 1 or 2 page version, that's a nice text to use. And I guess the last thing I'll mention that surprised us, and it surprised some readers of the book too, this book is presented as an anthology. It's part of the JPS Anthologies of Jewish Thought. So you might think that the large proportion of this book are texts that we've quoted. But it turns out that we wrote more of the book than we quoted. Between the introduction to the entire book and the introductions to each major section and the introductions to each chapter, and then the introduction to each reading, where we provide some context and some of the core ideas and a biography of the contributor who wrote it, you'll find that the balance of their words to our words is surprisingly tilted to our words. But the asset to that is that for someone coming to the movement who really may not be very familiar with us at all, there's a consistent, common, and contemporary voice articulating who we are, why we do, what we choose not to do, and how we create this Judaism that speaks to us. So I think that for a person simply coming to the movement or finding it for the first time, it'll be meaningful. I think it'll also be meaningful for people who have been in the movement for quite a while, but are looking for new ways to think about it, or may find this reaffirming who they are and who they've been for quite a long time.
Yeah, I would just underscore what Adam said about the amount of the book that we wrote. I have a tendency to say, the book that we wrote and very rarely say the book that we edited. Um, it's just it just sort of flows out more. And we did sort of have this wonderful working relationship and this rhythm as we did it. We sort of took on different parts, different chapters, and so on, and different essays. Adam would write whatever his self-assigned part, I would write my self-assigned part. We would exchange it, we would edit what we had done, and then we would send it on to our managing editor, Joy Weinberg at JPS. And we sort of thought, okay, well, that chapter's done. No. Then Joy would send it back. And, she really insisted and kept us on our toes about it, that as we say in the movement, that we said what we meant and meant what we said. And secondly, that we always focused on the positive. And sometimes it's easy to kind of slip into, even if you don't mean to, sort of casting subtle aspersions against, the things that we didn't do. We always wanted to say what we did do. And we didn't want to suggest that just simply because we disagree philosophically or theologically or in ritual practice what another movement is doing, that's their movement. That's their head, to use Adam's analogy, right? They can do what they want. We just ask that we be respected. And so focusing on the positive, we would get this back from Joy and then we would rework it. And then, generally there was still one more go around, at least from Joy. So it really was a process of writing it. And I have to say it was really pretty much a joyful process. No pun intended about Joy, sorry. It came out. Um, uh, because I obviously, having been ordained by the International Institute, know an awful lot about humanistic Judaism. But I would say the process of writing this book deepened even my knowledge and my ability to articulate it. And so I'm hoping that readers of the book will feel the same way, that some of those questions, not just the how can you be Jewish if you don't believe in God, but even, the nuts and bolts kind of thing. Well, what do you mean you have a Seder? What do you do? If the story is fiction, then why are you telling it? That sort of thing, even though it's not quite as granular by example, I think thematically it should empower readers as they go forward, and interact with their own family members and with the community at large.
Yeah. So I thought we've been talking a lot, and we want to make sure to open up for space for comments or questions. We did take a look at the discussion guide and have some questions. I thought I might give you sort of a tour of the discussion guide just to see what it's like. Certainly for those who are in communities that I saw in a couple of the comments haven't read the book yet or are planning a book event sometime in the future, that discussion guide might be very helpful for you. So, and that will also give us a chance to review some of the topics of the book. But before I do that, I just wanted to ask if there were any general questions from people who are here. I did get one in the registration I'll bring up in a little bit, but anyone who's here have a question. Miriam has a question.
I do. So, one of the questions I get regularly, and I got it again like a day ago, was can you please send me, it's not really a question, it's a request. Can you please send me a copy of your Siddur? And what I like about the things that you wrote, and I think the stance that we're taking in humanistic Judaism today rather than 60 years ago, is there's so much diversity. And that's usually my answer. We couldn't agree on what should be in the Siddur or what order. um, and I I think that this book speaks to that, maybe not straight in the face, but definitely in the way it presents the different ideas. So it's one of my hopes is that this is one of the messages that people will get from reading the book.
Yeah, we've gone around many times with make a Siddur, don't make a Siddur, who's going to do it. And I actually asked our communities once in a community leadership email group, if we put the time and the energy and got the copyright permissions and spent the money and published the book,
Would you?
would you buy it? And they said, yeah, we'd buy one and then take what we like out of it and photocopy things. And, they're not going to buy 50 of them to have people have a physical Siddur in their hands. That's just not how we work. And now that we're moving digitally, in many ways, it's more flexible and creative, and you're not stuck by whatever you've bound in the book. So I think that we did want to include, though, as Jody said, some concrete examples. So we have examples of a humanistic blessing for wine, and some of it's in the introductory material. Some of them are texts that appear. There is a collection called "Here Is Our Light" that is a liturgy collection that Miriam actually was one of the co-editors of that book. And so that was certainly an important part of the show how it's done piece, because people imagine sometimes that a humanistic service is like a CIA redacted document with a lot of blackout marks, like blessed are you who and doesn't like it's all negative. And I try to explain how we're a change in focus. Instead of looking above and beyond, we look out to each other, we look inside ourselves, we look to the natural world. But we felt like the best way to demonstrate that would be to have a concrete example, to have a ketubah. What would a ketubah look like? To have a passage from a Passover Haggadah from Rabbi Peter Schweitzer of blessed memory. And this is one of those cases where showing how it's done really helps people get it. Like when people come to our bar and bat mitzvahs, our B mitzvah ceremonies, then they say, "Oh, now I get it." Where they thought, in theory, it seemed really unusual. How do you do this? When they see it done, that's when it clicks. I don't know, Jody, if you want to add something, and then
Yeah,
we have a
yeah,
couple questions.
I was just going to add that, even though we don't have a set Siddur or a set body of work, I think that those of us who put together services and so on, we see a lot of similarity. We're drawing sort of from the same pool. Obviously, we're looking at many of the same writers, but it might not be everybody using the same Amichai poem, but using Amichai poetry is something that comes up, for example. Efo Ori is something that we generally are going to find from community to community. Oftentimes it will happen that among the rabbis, through our Association of Humanistic Rabbis, a request will go out that says, does anyone know who wrote this? Because a lot of times things just sort of keep coming down, and attribution is so key, right? That we don't just want to say author unknown, but clearly the fact that one, two, or three of us are able to say, I use that, or yes, I have a part of it, shows that the body of work that's available to us is shared.
And a lot of us were educated at the same institute.
Yes.
Miriam, Jody, and I were all ordained by the IISHJ. I now am running the training programs through that. So the canon of training is in common. So I saw Steve had his hand up, and then I saw Robbie had her hand up as well.
Yeah, I guess two questions. One is I noticed when the society asks for donations, it'll be like, $18, $36. It seems sort of superstitious, back to the old-fashioned religion. Is there any reason why, or am I being too narrow-minded?
Well, I don't represent the society, neither does Jody, but we know that using of the number 18, because in Hebrew, when you write the numbers in Hebrew letters, you'd have a chet for 8 and a yud for 10. So chai is life, and that's why they do donations in multiples of 18. Even if we don't believe that it's somehow going to magically give you a longer life, if you give us $18 versus $20, it's a cultural reference. I mean, we still use the Jewish year, 5785. After what? After the creation of the world? No, it's the cultural referent that Jews use. So I don't find using the number 18 for donation. My wife finds it silly. All right. And she's also Jewish, and a humanistic Jew, and thinks it's silly. I'll give you another example. I sometimes, when we're doing services, I'll bind the booklet so they open right to left instead of left to right, because feels a little bit more Jewish, and you find Yiddish books that open that way. I mean, it's not uniquely Hebrew that does that, but it is part of Jewish culture. Again, some people find it silly. Some people find it, oh, this is meaningful. This is like the prayer books that I grew up with. So it can be a cultural reference, even if you don't take it super seriously or as if it has magic power. Now, you'll have to decide what are the limits on that. Would you kiss a mezuzah on the way into a building or not? Well, that's a traditional Jewish culture, but you might choose not to do that. Will you go to the mikveh after one's period? Yeah, I mean, again, you might choose not to do that because in many ways that tradition is problematic. So, every person is going to make their own choices, but that's part of the excitement of a humanistic Judaism where people can make their own choices and find what's meaningful to them. We try to find common ground among all of us. Sometimes it's tricky, sometimes it's very successful. You said you had two questions. What was the second one?
Yes, I was just curious because I was playing around with joining a community, but it was sort of too far away. And I noticed that they fast. Some of the people fast for Yom Kippur. And I was a bit surprised. It seems to me fasting is a sort of a version of self-destruction in a way. I think what's more meaningful is instead of starving yourself, make a contribution to a food bank and feed people who would normally have a dinner that day.
Well, I recommend you don't fast because that doesn't have meaning to you. But for other people who find a sense of empathy for people who are hungry by not eating in a day, or people who are doing it as sort of a purgation experience or a solidarity with the Jewish people around the world who are choosing to fast on that day, there are a lot of positive reasons one could choose to fast. But your approach is exactly what my community has done for many years, where we would give out shopping bags with a wish list of products and food to collect on Rosh Hashanah. And then on Yom Kippur, we would say that not everybody, some people fast, some people don't fast, but there are people out there in the world who don't get a choice whether or not to fast. And we can help them out by our generosity. And we can start the new year doing something good. Good deeds are supposed to be a good thing. Well, let's start on the right foot. And so people bring back bags and boxes and large packages of toilet paper and toiletries and all kinds of stuff. We fill up 2 full SUVs with these materials that we then donate to a women and children's shelter in our area. So it's doing good. It's drawing on tradition, and we're using the fact that some fast and some don't. Now, we did have a proposal. We do a very successful oneg after our Rosh Hashanah services, where people can sit and schmooze and nosh, and it's very community building. And someone thought, well, maybe we should run an oneg after Yom Kippur. And we went around on it because, yes, some people don't fast, and yes, it builds community, but some people do fast. So one of our members suggested, well, we could just have what we call a no-neg. It'd be an empty plate oneg, where, yes, you can stay and schmooze, but, we'll have empty plates and empty glasses, and nobody would get upset. The point is that it's up to you. So if you find meaning in fasting, then fast. If you find meaning in fasting while drinking water, because that's a little bit healthier and less dangerous, do that. If you find meaning in eating a big fat ham sandwich on Yom Kippur, Gesundheit, go in good health and do what you want to do.
Yeah, I think the really important thing is that there's choice, and that there is not an authority that's going to tell you what it is that you should do and what it is that should allow you to find meaning. That, we can kind of, as rabbis, when we create the liturgy for the high holidays, for instance, we are hoping to create an environment in which the people who are there and participating are finding meaning in what we're doing. But these additional things like fasting and so on, it has to work for the individual. Instead of, we are not a movement, and I don't like to do the we are not stuff, right? But we are not a movement that says we have to do it because it's always been done this way. And that's very liberating. But with that comes a lot of responsibility, that people sort of do need to understand that. And many of us are part of larger families that are not made up of humanistic Jews. And so if we are invited to a break the fast that isn't going to happen until sundown, even if we personally might have broken the fast, quote unquote, we need to respect our Jewish relatives and the wider Jewish community. We do similarly to Adam's congregation. We collect groceries and so on, and we give it to the local food pantry. And so that's another way that we provide meaning, as well as providing a sense of community. Because sometimes problems can just seem so enormous that people say, but what can I do? You know, great, like my budget is just so tight right now. Okay, maybe I can afford, like, a half dozen cans of vegetables, and that's it. That's wonderful if that's all that they can do, but they want to be doing that. But then when they see that it's an SUV that's now filled because so many people have participated in doing this, it raises them up and it gives them an additional sense of meaning and purpose.
To tie your two questions together, and then Robbie, I know you're waiting. Jewish culture, Jewish life, Jewish civilization is our library to choose from, our cafeteria to browse through. And we get to choose what's meaningful to us individually and as communities. And we get to create anew and add those books to the shelves. But it's a wide library, a vast selection to choose from. We can choose from religious elements, we can choose from secular elements, we can choose from cultural elements, historical elements. Maybe the harvest meaning behind Sukkot is more meaningful to us than the wandering in the desert during the Exodus story that was added later. But that's our library to choose from. I had a Sunday school class this past Sunday. We started to talk about Purim, and one of the cultural elements of Purim that I find really creative is in Iran. There's a tradition where you write Haman's name on the sole of your shoe, so that all day long you're walking around and you're stepping on Haman and scuffing out Haman all day long. And I thought, wow, that's fun. I'm going to teach the kids how to write a hey and a mem and a nun, and then they can write Haman on their shoes in dry erase marker or something like that. And, it'll gradually wear off over time, and it'll be fun for them. And I'm not Iranian Jewish. None of them are Persian Jews, but it's part of the wide library of Jewish cultural creativity that we are heirs to and we get to choose from. And as Amos Oz writes in another one of his essays in there, we are the heirs to Jewish tradition. That means we are not museum curators who keep it exactly the same. We get to keep what we like, adapt it, and modify it. Maybe someone else wants other parts of it that don't speak to us, but it's all ours in some way. All right, Robbie, you've been very patient.
No, I'll just comment briefly on what you were saying in terms of how nothing is set up for us to do as everybody else does. When we do introductory sessions about Arenu and Humanistic Judaism, either in person or online, newcomers to Arenu and the movement, Humanistic Judaism, are often delighted, first surprised, and then delighted that there is so much choice. That as part of the introductory hour that we provide, we specifically say, this is the way we do things, but not the way that every single other humanistic congregation does things. And most people are just astonished and thrilled, and it's interesting to see their reaction. It's very positive. My question, just going back to the book, was whether you had any notion that this would be used as a text, as suggested reading for conversion classes, for adult education classes. Was there some thought about this being formalized in any kind of way throughout the movement?
Well, yes.
I was going to say, short answer is yes, and I think that also led to the study guide.
Study guide.
So that the additional questions that focus, and the Siddur question's a really good one, because in chapter 12 on liturgy, that's like one of the opening questions that we had. Should there be, so that people can have that kind of discussion. But yes, we did anticipate that it would be used as a text for adult ed, both within humanistic Jewish congregations and communities, but also in other denominations. We also hope that it would be used in an introduction to Judaism at the college level, and possibly in comparative religion, modern Judaism. When I took when I was getting my master's at Spertus and took my class in modern Judaism, humanistic Judaism was not mentioned once. And so I wrote my paper, a 25-page paper on humanistic Judaism. And it was like, here, I gift it to you. Maybe you want to consider using this and mention our movement, right? I don't know whether or not that changed in that syllabus or not, but now with this book, it's very easy to point to, and I'm very proud to say that the library at Spertus ordered a copy. So,
By the way, speaking of libraries, both
yes.
Jody and I have had great success lately asking our members who live in different communities to ask your library to stock a copy. Libraries have budgets to acquire books. I mean, if they'll accept your gift of a book, that'd be wonderful. But even if not, you can always recommend. In many cases, there's a web form on their website where you can just suggest a book for them to pick up. And it's happened in a dozen communities in our area where our members are located. A couple university campuses, they've asked the university library to pick up a copy and they ordered it and they have it. So that's a great way for us to show up in the book catalog, right? Somebody searches for cultural Judaism or secular Judaism or even humanistic Judaism. Boom, here's a 2025 book on the subject right there. So the more libraries that have it, the better. Yes, it does sell books, but not in quantity, right? And in terms of doing study things and study groups, we absolutely hope that would be the case, that local groups would do that. Again, there is a bulk discount if a community orders 10 or more copies directly from the publisher. I think it's 50% off the list price. So instead of $40, it's $20. And then you have shipping, but it's generally reasonable. And again, I don't know if that discount code will continue beyond the end of February. So you may need to jump on that if that's something your community is thinking about. I thought maybe I just give a quick tour through the study guide, since that might be useful. And again, if you go to jps.org and you find the book there, or if you go to the Institute's page, iissj.org, there's a page all about the book there, and that links to the JPS page as well to order it. Those will give you that discount code right there on that page. So let me jump here. This is the table of contents that Jody went through so ably. And then here's the discussion and study guide. And so we decided that we wanted to have questions on each of the major sections. The introduction includes both a history of secular Judaism more broadly, including the Jewish socialist world, the kibbutz world, even a little bit on Reconstructionist Judaism. I know that was one of the comments that somebody was exploring. And also what differentiates us from other movements. It's a nice overview essay of 25 pages or so for people just to introduce them to the movement. And then, of course, we had some questions, but we wanted to make the questions ones that would open conversation. So do you make your own Jewish decisions about Jewish law, tradition, and customs? How do your decisions differ from your family or friends? Before coming to this text, were you aware of a history of secular Judaism? Were there Yiddish speakers in your family? Were your family's members of secular Jewish organizations? What values do you adhere to and advocate in connection with your Judaism? Continuity and choice, creativity or comfort. These are all things we talked about in the introductory text. So again, the goal is to open up conversations in the local community or discussion group. And because the book is organized in these sections, it actually would work really well as like a 4 or 5 part series where you could do the introduction for session 1, and then section 1, which includes chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. We actually didn't put the section breaks in the discussion guide, but you'll find them in the table of contents. So you'll see here part 1, beliefs and ethics. There'll be the first 5 chapters are there. So you could have one section just on part 1. That'd be a discussion session. And then another one on part 2.
Let me just add one thing as Adam's showing you the study guide. When you go to jps.org, you're not going to find anything highlighted like you're seeing here. When Adam and I were getting ready for this, we were picking out very particular questions that if we got to that point and we wanted to throw some questions out for your opinions and the sort of the open-ended kinds of questions, that's why those sections are highlighted. It didn't mean that question was any better than any of the other ones. It just seemed that for this kind of a discussion on Zoom, that we might throw that out to the group and say, all right, out of all those questions, instead of our having to make that determination tonight, that's the one that we thought for that section might be most productive or fruitful.
Yes, we love all our questions equally. Okay. So again, a couple questions in response to the opening essay on Sherwin Wine by Sherwin Wine, his essay on the God question, and then Yaakov Malkin's on God as a literary figure. We thought it might be interesting for us to discuss what does it mean when you treat God as a character in the story instead of the God that people think is really real out there. How does that change how you read the stories and how you read the character? Positive humanism. What you can see is that there's general questions about the chapter and then also specific questions about the specific essays. And what we might suggest for a community, if they're looking to do a discussion, is it's fine to have, you could either do general questions first, or you could dive into the essays first and then some general questions about, what does this section have to say to you? But you'll see that some of these questions are responding specifically to text. So for Greg Epstein's short piece, What is Humanism? We have a specific thing. Do you agree with Epstein's summary of humanism as being without God? Then we also have a general question. What are some of the implications of humanists believe in life before death? If this is life and this is all there is as far as we know, what happens? How does that change your experience? So I don't want to go through all of it, but just know that each chapter has these general questions as an overview to the chapter. Think secular ethics is an oxymoron. Must one have a belief in God to be a good person? And explain your response to that. What choices do you make? So these are just general conversation questions, as well as responses specifically to the content of the essays. I see there's some comments in the chat, which I can't see while I'm talking.
Would these kind of study sessions require somebody, how shall I put it, knowledgeable to lead or moderate, or could it just truly be a bunch of people getting together at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon to chat?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, yes, and right.
Yes.
We are not here to tell you how to do your Judaism. I once said to somebody who was saying, well, I have to work on Yom Kippur, whatever. I said, humanistic Jews have been making Jews feel better about doing whatever the hell they want to do anyways for 50 years. So that's our tradition. So if you want to have a formal study program, great. If you want people want to get together and discuss it one time, wonderful. Whatever it's good for them. I mean, this could be useful for even a advanced, high school class. If you have people in the latter years of high school, they might be able to grapple with this. One thing that my community is going to be doing is we're going to make it a gift to Bar Mitzvah families, but we're giving the kid a Kiddush cup with their name and a date inscribed on it. We don't expect that a 13-year-old is going to want to read this book. Maybe the precocious one will, but we're not going to assume that's going to be the case. But for the family, this might be a nice, sort of affirmation that they've chosen this community. This is their approach, and so they might explore it and learn some more about who we are. If it's on the way out, it's on the way out. If it's the bridge to a longer connection, then even better. So there's lots of ways to use the book as people choose to use it, and I really do hope that being published by the Jewish Publication Society, which is jointly publishing with University of Nebraska Press, that will give people some credibility to use it in a rabbinic seminary class or in a graduate level or even undergraduate level university class, because it comes with that hechsher, that kosher stamp from the academic world and the Jewish publishing world, that we are not just doing it for ourselves, that this speaks to a broader audience.
And we really made a strong effort for this to be very readable, that if some of the in earlier drafts of a chapter, an introduction, got a little too fanciful, shall we say, or what Adam would say, accuse me of using SAT words. So those are the college exams, right? To get into, as you're in high school to do that. It's like, all right, fine, there's a simpler way to say it. And so we didn't, quote, dumb it down, but instead we wanted it to be very readable. I noticed that Miriam had put something that she hadn't read it cover to cover. I would suggest that while it was written in a particular order, if it suits your community to delve into, the section on culture, then go all in on that. If you have great interest on the liturgy or on education and models for that, you can pick and choose. You don't have to necessarily read it in the order that it's written. And that might also be helpful. You might find it useful, for instance, when I mentioned Englander, Carrot, and Nicole Krauss. Maybe you sort of want to see what we said and excerpted it, but then have a book group that's going to read the books that are, that we took those excerpts from, to sort of see what else do these authors say? What do the rest of that essay or short story say? That would be another useful kind of thing. I mean, you all know your communities best to know, is it more, let's go with fiction? Okay, there's a lot of additional things in that, or is it, you have a movie group? Go Forth and Learn is going to have a lot of suggestions in that. Or do you have a group or a subgroup of people interested who really want the underlying philosophy and really want to delve into that in a much deeper way? Well, then the part on beliefs and ethics, so mix and match, mix and match.
And we don't expect you're going to like all the readings equally. We are required to like all the readings equally, but you are not. So it may be that one thing resonates with you and another one doesn't speak to you as much, or you find some disagreements with it. You might read that chapter on the kippah, which includes a variety of perspectives, and you might say, I agree with number 1, 3, and 4, but I really can't stand number 2. And fine. I mean, there's a long Jewish tradition of arguing and disagreeing, and yet still feeling connected to a broader identity. And that's really what the book represents, and what Judaism represents at its best, is that ability to argue and then sit down and break challah together. There was a comment in the chat box I wanted to mention. Jamie mentioned that there are plenty of Jews in other movements that don't believe in the traditional personal God, understand God as a metaphor, and so on. You'll get some liberal rabbis who will say, well, I don't believe in the God you don't believe in either. So then you have to say to them, well, what do you believe? What God do you believe in? And we have a couple of essays, actually, one in the liturgy section and by me, and one in the God question section by Sherwin Wine, that basically try to tackle this question of, why don't we just say God and mean something else? Which is really what Reconstructionist Judaism did starting in the 1930s, because Mordecai Kaplan felt that he had to keep the traditional liturgy. He needed that continuity with the past of Jewish ritual practice, but he just couldn't believe any of it. He didn't believe in a God that was a you or that was a king. So he tried to change what those words meant in the context that he was saying it, and he tried to think of it poetically or as a metaphor. But when Sherwin Wine started formulating a humanistic Judaism in the 1960s, Reconstructionist was an option. And it just wasn't satisfying, because he felt like he was saying things he just didn't believe, that the words had meaning. That when I say king, it means a male autocratic ruler. And just because I say melech still means king. It's just in another language. It's still referring to a concept, and it still includes a lot of baggage with it. So maybe you do believe in a God that's a force for good in the universe, or an aura, or a spark of light within each person. But does that God part the Red Sea as described in the Hebrew Bible? Does that God intervene in history? Does that God care what you eat or what you wear or who you love? That's what a classic God does. And the word doesn't lose those old meanings because you've tried to create new meanings too. We just felt it was much cleaner, wiser, more meaningful to say what we meant and mean what we say. That's one of our slogans we bring up a couple of times in the book. And to be as clear as possible with the language that we have. Now, there'll be times where we say poetic language is okay. We're not, hard-headed, pedantic people. So there's a wonderful poem by, I think it's by Rachel, where she says, "The river sings to the stone." Now you could be pedantic and say, well, rivers don't have vocal cords, and rivers cannot sing, and stones don't have ears, so they don't listen. And that's a little too far. We're allowed to be poetic. But then the question becomes, does the God metaphor work for us? And in the end, because of the baggage involved, the God metaphor doesn't work for us. It may work for others. Again, gesundter, hey, go, have it mean something different than what it actually says. But we would rather be consistent in our English, our Hebrew, our Yiddish, our Ladino, whatever language we're speaking. We want to be able to feel fully connected. And so maybe we lose something on the continuity side. We sing Na'aseh Shalom, we will make peace, instead of Oseh Shalom, he will make peace. And we sing Al Kol HaOlam, for all the world, instead of Al Kol Yisrael, just for all Israel. We've broadened the circle. We can clap at the same point in the song. We can use the same melody. But we have that integrity of saying clearly what we believe. And after all, this is the last thought on this. If Jewish people wrote it in the first place, reflecting what they believe, then Jewish people can rewrite it or write something new that says what they think now.
Right. And so I would like to add two things. One is in a moment what Barb had put in the chat about aren't we being revisionist or isn't it appropriation? But before that, about God as a literary character. So when we take a look at the traditional text, the traditional Torah text, for instance, we don't edit God out. God's a character. And so what are we going to learn about that character? What are the characteristics and the traits of that character? Just like Moses is a character. Abraham and Sarah are characters. The biblical God is a character. And the piece on by Dan Friedman that he has about reclaiming our history, about that we need to be very familiar with our texts. And as humanistic Jews, we don't have to throw everything out, but neither are we really free to edit those kinds of traditional texts. That text stands on its own for its own time. And we're free to interpret, as every generation of Jews has done always. Our interpretation is as valid as any other interpretation. And that leads me to the question of aren't we being revisionist or isn't this appropriation? I think if the standard is what the Orthodox consider their interpretation and their language, then we would be guilty. But I don't think that we have to defend ourselves and our point of view. Instead, what we are saying keeps us consistent with saying what we mean and mean what we say. And I don't think anybody really suggests that the reform movement was guilty of revisionism or appropriation when they suddenly were changing things to include our fathers and our mothers, right? That to the traditional liturgy that would say just our fathers. Or when they're talking about they're trying to make God less than a male king, right? Any other movement that's doing that, they don't really do it from a defensive posture. They do it because it's consistent with their beliefs, and they do it because that's what their congregants and their members are ready to take that step, to follow that lead of the people who have put together. But in the Reform Siddur that got changed a number of years ago, they have readings down the side. And they have their liturgy sort of centered, and then they have these additional readings that are attributed, if you find your way from whatever page you were on, to go all the way back, because they don't bother to put the name of the person that's there. And so I was at my great niece's bat mitzvah, and I was reading down the side, and I was like, oh, that's got to be Amichai. I can just tell. I'm thumbing back through, and sure enough, it was. The difference is that the Reform movement keeps the liturgy and just has those as points of interest, along the trip. We take the stuff that's on the side and we put it in the middle. Okay? Because that's going to have meaning for us. That's what's going to resonate for us.
I'll also add one last thing. It's not appropriation when it's your own culture, right? We're the heirs to Jewish culture. It's not like we're taking from someone else's culture and then using it inappropriately. Now, there will be people who don't like the changes that we make. That will happen. That's really as much as an aesthetic choice as it is an ideological choice. They might say, who are you to make changes? But they might also say, I'm just used to it the old-fashioned way. I'm used to it the way I know it. I sometimes laugh that we've made ourselves a really tough row to hoe, because one of the few things people remember from their bad Hebrew school education is Baruch Atah Adonai. And we don't have that. It's one of the few things they actually remember. And we've changed that too. But over time, people get used to it, and for the people that it's meaningful to have something creative and new, instead of saying it the old-fashioned way and then claiming it means something else, or saying, well, I'm just saying it because it's old, or our ancestors said, quote, and then just have the whole service. Our desire to have that creative integrity, we value continuity. We'll sing Hine Matov, Hivenu Shalom Aleichem, Ushavta Mayim, which comes from the Psalms. I mean, we have songs that we sing that come from traditional Jewish sources that we use as given. But we also feel like that consistent humanistic message and celebrating our identity through our philosophy is important enough that we're willing to make some of those changes. We gain on the integrity side what we may lose a little bit on the continuity of saying the exact same old words. As Miriam put in the chat, our ancestors created, and so do we. Yeah, we're allowed to edit too. It's like a Talmud page, right? You've got the main text and comments, and there's space for us too to write what we need to say. Well, we're a little over an hour, so any other comments, questions, gripes? I will ask one other favor. If when you're reading the book, you find any mistakes or typos or boo-boo, it is inevitable. Every service I have ever printed for every congregation I've ever served has had some typo in it, and not on purpose, despite my best efforts. So we've already found some small things that need to be fixed in future printings. I have one I have to email Jody about that somebody emailed me about. They came across something and said, that's not true. And I did some research, and it's a debatable point. So it's worth at least maybe an editor's note. But we'll talk about it and we'll see if it's worth adding something. But in any case, we're happy to hear from you. That's the point, right? We are not the authorities from Mount Sinai that are commanding down the gospel truth, to mix metaphors. We are not only rabbis in Humanistic Judaism, we are also members. We are also participants, believers, because believing is better than non-believing in one of the essays we have in the book. And we are you in that respect. So we're happy to hear anything we can do better. And we are thrilled to hear those who have enjoyed the book. If I could ask one other favor in addition to the library request, if you have the time and the inclination when you've read the book and you like it, even if you didn't love it, there are opportunities to let other people know what you thought of the book. On Amazon, there's an opportunity to write a review of the book. Even if you didn't buy it from Amazon, I think you can write a review of the book there. And Goodreads is another website that many people use to see what book they want to read. The more you can respond to the book, like the book, write a review of the book, it will really help the algorithms make it show up for people as they're browsing and looking for things, and will help new people find us and what we do. I did want to mention one question that somebody asked, and this may be a good place for us to wrap up, is, well, the song Tradition and Fiddler on the Roof is ironic because the whole musical is about tradition falling apart. And by the way, if you read the lyrics of the song Tradition, none of us on this call would want to live that lifestyle of arranged marriages and strict gender divisions and women behind the mechitza, so working to support their husband to go and pray. I mean, that's not the world we live in. That was tradition, and the musical is about the end of tradition, or at least the evolution of tradition. I'll get off that soapbox. Okay, so the last question somebody had submitted when they registered for the class. Will someone who's 20 years old have any idea what Humanistic Judaism is all about? Do we have a future? Well, I like to think that we do. I have two kids who were raised in humanistic Jewish congregations. They will make their own choices in life. They may or may not wind up being part of a humanistic Jewish community or identifying as a humanistic Jew. What they have gotten is a few positives. They've had meaningful Jewish experiences. They've had joyful Jewish experiences. They've had fun being Jewish, and that's really important. They've had extended family Jewish experiences. They've had home Jewish experiences, not just in the synagogue setting. They've had creative Jewish experiences where they've had the chance to create something new and to become the authors of their own tradition. There's no guarantees. They are not programmed automatons that will do what I say, but I hope that those positive resonances will have a positive impact on their identity. And as for the stranger who finds this book, the university student who does look it up in the catalog or stumble across it on the shelves and begins to read it, I think it will speak to them because we have always been a movement of immigrants, people who come from some other Jewish experience and evolve in a different direction. They begin asking questions, they begin challenging what they've been told is always true, and they'll find us. If they find us at 20, Baruch Hashem, wonderful, because they didn't find us later. I get all these experiences of people who say, I felt this way for 20 years, I felt this way for 50 years, and I never found you. Now, part of that is their searching prowess on Google. Part of it is our messaging prowess. But if this book is out there and people find it, I think it will speak to a lot of those people that Jody mentioned who don't identify with Judaism as a religion, who don't believe in the God of the Bible. Over 20% of American Jews, and we have this survey result at the end of the book, over 20% of American Jews do not believe in the God of the Bible and do not believe in some other kind of higher power or spiritual form. They just do not believe in a supernatural anything. 20% of American Jews is over 1 million Jews. They're out there. And now that we're out there, I hope they'll find us and it'll speak to them too.
Yeah, and I would add to that, when Adam's referencing people who have come from other movements or whatever, I grew up in the conservative movement and am so grateful that by virtue of what I call the luck of the zip code, that I moved to an area where there was a humanistic Jewish congregation, and went there and to meet the rabbi. My husband and I came away saying, it's really what we believe, but did you notice they didn't say anything about God? And we weren't ready then, our son was a baby at that point. But it was there. And what we discovered was it was a place that we could go to where we could, again, say what we mean what we say, have integrity, even though it meant a pretty serious break with the continuity, the familial continuity. My sister still belongs to a conservative congregation. But Humanistic Judaism has given my life so much meaning. The philosophy has grounded me. It has carried me through joyous times and the deepest, most painful sorrows. And in a way that I don't think, I sometimes joke and say, I didn't have any faith to lose, that when bad things have happened. And so it's important to understand, I raised my kids as humanistic Jews. Their kids, my grandkids, are humanistic Jews. Again, back when I was at Spertus, Dr. Byron Sherwood of blessed memory had said, well, my problem with secular Judaism is I've never met a second generation secular Jew. And I felt like saying, would you like me to introduce you to a few? So even though he and I were theologically polar opposites, we had such deep respect for one another. And I think that showing up, demonstrating what it is that we do, when to echo what Adam had said, when people say to us after a bar mitzvah or a wedding or a funeral, this is what I believed all my life, but I never knew you were there. That's both. I did a bar mitzvah a lot of years ago, and a man came up to me and said, I've been going to these for 40 years, and this is the first one I understood. And that warmed my heart and it broke it at the same time. So to the extent that this book sort of allows inroads into what we do, how we do it, that we do it with integrity. We do it with intentionality. You know, this isn't sort of on the fly. That more people will find us, more people will understand us, respect us, and hopefully join us.